We are joined with Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society here at the Monday Night Community Show this evening. Dave, do you have any useful tips for us at this time of year?
Apart from wearing Macintosh and Wellington boots, yes. I think what you need to do, and really, if it's raining outside, is get a plan out actually on where you're going to grow your vegetables, making sure that you rotate those particular crops and plants, other plants as well, annual plants as well. So you rotate the crops on your vegetable plot, thus keeping down the risk and the build-up of pests and diseases by growing the same thing in the same area all the time. One thing that actually springs to mind: don't keep growing potatoes in the same plot, for instance, because it just attracts wireworm, which is very difficult to eradicate. Once you've got wireworm in there, they'll make a beeline for your spuds. Following year, plant them somewhere else. At least the wireworm's got to travel to them, put it that way. Dig only when the soil's reasonably dry, never when it's wet enough to stick your tools and to your tools and your boots. You're doing more harm than good, basically, because the soil becomes compacted. It ruins the structure that way, actually, and it defeats the purpose of why you're digging in the first place. So keep off it if you feel that it's still sticky and gooey and very heavy. Compost is ready for use on the garden when it smells pleasant.
All right.
When it's dark brown or dark black, they call it liquid gold, actually, or brown gold or something like that. When it's dark brown, moist and crumbly. So in your compost, use vegetable peelings, eggshells, tea leaves, tea bags, shredded paper, board, garden waste, spent potting compost, grass clippings, but not too deep a layer, because grass has this habit of damping everything down and making lots of stuff underneath it wet. So you'll need to roll it over and basically dig it out and roll it over. Make sure that you get different layers in different areas in your compost bins. So grass clippings, not too deep a layer. Annual weeds which haven't gone to seed, they can be used in your compost. Make sure they don't have seeds attached to them. Don't put them in. And old bedding plants, those kinds of annuals which you will have thrown away. In your compost, it's suggested you don't use diseased or pest-ridden plants. Perennial weeds, for example, things like dock, ground elder, certainly not couch grass. It has this incredible capacity to regenerate itself, couch grass. Obvious things like meat and dairy products or kitchen fat scraps. And another one which not everybody talks about, of course, is animal feces as well, cat and dog droppings, those kinds of things. Don't use those in compost bins at all. A good tip, actually, is to soak your hard seeds overnight. It sometimes helps them to germinate quicker. I'm thinking of things like peas, beans. There's a plant which is an absolute beautiful climber called Ipomoea, morning glory, which has a very, very hard seed, and that benefits from actually being soaked overnight. We don't all have huge backyards or gardens, so always, please, consider the height and spread of a tree or shrub before you buy it, or decide where you're actually going to plant it. And I'm specifically thinking about a plant that we were talking about while there was a record playing, willow, for instance. The larger sizes of willow. Willow will literally suck all the moisture out of the ground. It's one of those plants that you wouldn't put within many, many yards of a house, and considering the size that some of them do actually grow to as well. Another one, of course, is the cursed or the accursed Leylandii, which is very, very quick growing. We'll come on to that in a bit later when we're talking about hedging, that kind of thing. But another good tip is actually buying large pots of perennials. Buying pots, large perennials in effect, which can often be divided straight away. What you're doing there is the economics of it. You can actually divide it up very quickly, get yourself 3 or 4 plants when you've actually paid for the price of one. Good economics where that's concerned. But I think last but not least, and very important, you will appreciate that there's an awful lot of electricity, an awful lot of electrical gadgetry in gardens these days. Invest in a good circuit breaker, I think. Very, very important indeed. It is so easy to chop across a power cable and then disastrous results, catastrophic results. So a good circuit breaker, I think, is very, very important these days, given that there is so much electrical gadgetry in gardens these days.
Dave, what is the best sort of bush and hedge that's quick and fast growing?
It's growing a hedge very much depends on what it's intended to be used for. There's an ornamental hedge. There are hedges specifically designed for security, windproofing, or even soundproofing on occasions. Some are grown purely to mark a borderline, things like privet, laurel, yew, the kind that you see in front gardens. There are lots of them in front gardens, and which form a dense borderline between you and the pavement, or you and your neighbour. Then, of course, there's the dreaded fast-growing Leylandii, which I think I've already mentioned this evening. You still need patience when you're growing a hedge, as they do take a bit of time to grow. You've said this to me this evening, for instance. You put some small slips in last year. Didn't really do anything for the first year, but the second year they've really come on. And you're very pleased with what you've actually done. But don't forget, though, of course, that a hedge takes up more space than a fence. But it can be more natural and pleasing to the eye, and it's attractive as well as providing shelter and food. The berry type of hedge, those plants which actually produce berries for birds, for instance. It'll feed birds when there's very little else around. Some, as I said, are purely ornamental and colourful, such as those which are made up from hardy fuchsias. Fuchsia magellanica is one. You'll see quite a few of those now on the island. There are some in Minster Village, for instance, which have this beautiful, beautiful red-purple hue as you go past them. I have one, for instance, which is Fuchsia alba, which is white, pink-tinged, very small but profusely flowered fuchsia. Again, it's very dense, but it's a little bit brittle, so it's there for ornament's sake, actually, and it's easily broken, of course. Fuchsia hedge, as I said, does give you a superbly colourful display throughout the summer and the early autumn. Then, of course, there's the security type hedging. So you might think of thorny or spiky varieties of plants such as blackthorn. Blackthorn, of course, actually will additionally give you sloes for your sloe gin for Christmas. Right. They taste awful until you've actually put them into the gin and steep them in the gin for a few months, but the gin, I am told, actually tastes delicious. Damson, for instance, forms a very, very, very good hedge. It has lethal spines on it, I know, because I've got one which separates me from next door, and the spines are about 2 inches thick, or 2 inches long, actually. Very, very nasty. Rosa rugosa, for instance, you've probably seen these as well. It's a rambling type of rose. It's got very large scented flowers. Additionally, in the autumn, of course, it has these beautiful red hips.
Oh yeah, rose hedging.
Yeah, the rose hedging, that kind of thing. And of course that will also feed birds throughout the winter. But you get the advantage of having the flowers, the smell of the flowers, as well as those hips, which look very colourful when everything else is perhaps dying off. It's also got some pretty savage prickles on it as well. I know to my cost, actually, getting hold of one by accident. And quickthorn is another one, for instance, which will grow very